welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media myths. On this edition, we talk about the persistence of Russiagate. Like a bad cold, it just won't go away, or it's just very instrumental for a group of people that have nothing else to use in pursuit of their own agenda and power. To discuss this and more, we're joined by Daniel McAdams. He is Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And we have George Szamuely. He is an author, commentator, and a co-founder of this channel. All right, Danny, let me go to you first here. I mean, we've gone through all of this for 3.5 years plus, and now it's getting resurrected again. So we hear at the end of last week, it's the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, very convenient, are meddling in our election, like Russia did in 2016, which was never proven. Not one scintilla of evidence given to prove that thesis here. So why does it continue? The Mueller report said there was no collusion. Why do they cling to it?
Well, because it's the only thing they have going, I think. You know, this is it's such an absurd fantasy that Washington continues with. And of course, as we well know, this was born in the U.S. intelligence agencies. John Brennan and his cohorts cooked this whole thing up out of whole cloth, managed to convince a gullible America that, frankly, as you know, Peter, doesn't travel, doesn't get around, doesn't know very much about the rest of the world, doesn't even have passports for the most part, convince them that there are these bad guys out there that are going to subvert our dear, precious bodily fluids and turn us all who knows what.
Dr. Strangelove. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's the persistence of this myth, which is fed by America's ignorance of the rest of the world, even ironically and paradoxically, as Americans feel they have the right to rule the rest of the world. So there's a big cauldron of nasty soup.
You know, George, one of the interesting things, I've talked about this incessantly, even to the point where it's boring because there's no facts to grab onto. And the conclusion I draw as it's being resurrected again is that the fact of the matter is there isn't much Russia or Russians in Russiagate.
No, there really isn't. Robert Mueller, if you remember, wheeled out grandly an indictment of 13 Russians who were working on a troll farm, you know, the grandly named the Internet Research Agency, which of course was close to Putin, as everything Russian is close to Putin. But Mueller was figuring that the Russians weren't going to show up, and so he would have the wonderful publicity of, well, these swinish Russians, they're too cowardly to show up in court to answer these charges. But the Russians were quite clever, and because Mueller had indicted a corporation, a Russian corporation, that enabled them to actually send legal representation to court. And once that happened, Mueller's case just simply unraveled, and eventually the DOJ just dropped its charges against these Russians. And it reached a point when even an exasperated judge said, "Can I please see some evidence that this Internet Research Agency is actually working for the Russian government?" And Mueller, of course, had no evidence of that. So you're absolutely right. There are no Russians in Russiagate. But it is very useful for the Democrats because they already are laying the groundwork for the screams and hollerings that will come about if they lose in November. I mean, you know, Nancy Pelosi has already said the Russians are working 24/7 to elect Donald Trump. So, well, if they're working 24/7 and Donald Trump is reelected, then who's responsible? The Russians. So yes, so therefore this is what we will be hearing from November the 4th onwards, should the Democrats lose.
Well, Daniel, the interesting thing is that if Trump wins, then it'll be because of the Russians, and if Biden wins, it'll be because of the Chinese. So that's essentially what it gets down to. And with these these mail-in ballots, I suppose they're going to be searching for ballots written in Mandarin and Cyrillic. Okay, I mean, they're never going to talk about how antiquated and backward the American electoral system is. Okay, has one of the worst in the world. And we've known this for decades, and nothing is being done about it. So there's very convenient fall countries, if I can use that term, for whatever goes wrong. Go ahead, Daniel.
Well, I think that's baked into the whole system. You know, there's corruption very deep in the U.S. electoral system. As you point out, it's a hopeless system. The cheating is rampant. You know, I spent a lot of years, Peter, as an election observer in Central and Eastern Europe, and the things that you see developing in the U.S. in terms of electoral fraud, in terms of campaign fraud, in terms of signaling before the election that you will not accept the outcome.
Yeah.
These are the things that we saw classically when elections were being stolen and undermined and subverted by the likes of George Soros, to be quite honest with you, when it happened in Central and Eastern Europe in the 1990s. And I note with some level of interest that George Soros is very active in our electoral process. And I think it's a little bit naive to blame our entire problems on one single very wealthy individual with political ambitions. However, he does come with a large machine around him and a lot of very important and very powerful allies. Again, I see what's happening in the U.S. as a kind of color revolution ongoing for the past 3 years that I recognize so well from places like Slovakia in '98, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, George, I've been saying this for a long time, is that the colored revolution playbook that was the present iteration started with the destruction of Yugoslavia, and it just updated it by country, and lo and behold, it has come to the United States, where the intelligence agencies are behind disinformation, propping up people, destroying lives. We'll talk about the Flynn case in a second. Persecuting innocent people and going after political jokesters like Mr. Stone. So I mean, this is kind of classical. I don't like the term banana republic, or third world, but it does have an echo. George.
Yes, exactly. And it is a pure repetition of what we saw in Yugoslavia in 2000. In the election that was immediately declared, that Milosevic had lost, and that's it. But conveniently, all the ballot papers were burnt. So we just had to take it on trust.
Problem solved.
Milosevic has cheated in the election. Well, you know, what was the way? Where are the ballot papers? And then, of course, we've seen the whole process in Ukraine. We saw it in Georgia. They tried to pull this off in Russia. It failed in Russia. They've tried it several times in Belarus. And as you say, they've done this in the United States. The Obama administration, in its immediately after the election, declared that, it was all Russia, Russian interference, Russia stole it, and immediately set about undermining its successor by suggesting that they had colluded with the Russians. And that has cast an appalling shadow on American politics for the next 4 years. And it looks like it's just going to continue until finally the intelligence agencies and the Democrats get the result they want. And then magically the whole thing will just disappear. But until then, it's just going to be a steady drumbeat of Russia, Russia, Russia.
You know, Daniel, what I find really disappointing and makes me distraught is that we do have the testimony of people in front of Adam Schiff's congressional committee. They were released, and not one piece of evidence was produced of this alleged collusion by these major players in the Obama administration. But somehow, I guess CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post and the New York Times didn't get that information. How did we get it and they didn't? Okay, I mean, they basically, we've seen. I don't know. We'll have to find out one day if you can claim perjury on TV, because all of these officials made claims on TV and in interviews and high-paying gigs on cable, but under oath they said something very different. I mean, that's what makes this hoax even more hopeless, okay? Because you can find the truth if you're interested. Go ahead, Daniel.
That really was a remarkable aspect, and I'm glad you brought it up, Peter. This whole idea of the Brennans and the Clappers and the Comeys of the world on television saying, well, if you see what I saw, if you could see, no, I've got clearance so you guys can't see it, but you would not believe it. And then, as you say, when you see the transcripts, they said, well, I don't know anything. I have no idea. There's gambling going on here. I mean, it's It's just amazing. They knew they were under penalty of perjury if they lied, and so they didn't lie in private, but in public they lied their asses off. Excuse my language. And yeah, the media interest is zero because they're playing along with it. We're the most heavily propagandized country, I think, in the history of the world. And it doesn't say very much for this American sense of being ruggedly individualistic and free thinking. No, unfortunately, the opposite is true. It's a nation of sheep ruled by wolves, and wolves run the media, and so that's why there's simply no interest in this.
Let's finish up on what General Flynn, George. I think that's one of the reasons why they want to keep the embers of this hoax going, because they want this conviction. They want Flynn to go down, because then they can say, "See, we got him." Okay, because all the other ones, Manafort and everyone else, these are process crimes. They're crimes, but they're process crimes that have nothing to do with the campaign, have nothing to do with Donald Trump, have nothing to do with the election. But Flynn is the one they won't give up on. And we have that judge that I think it's going to be later today will make some kind of ruling. But that's why they keep Flynn, in parenthetical handcuffs, because they need something to grab onto. Let's finish up on that. Go ahead, George.
That's exactly right. And you saw this with Sally Yates's testimony last week, when she was saying completely outrageously and deceitfully that Flynn was talking with the Russian ambassador, plotting to undermine U.S. foreign policy. It was absolute nonsense. And even at the time, even in January 2017, she hadn't made that claim. All she had said back then is that, oh, he misled Vice President Pence. So now she's got with the program that, well, Flynn and Kislyak were plotting to undermine the foreign policy. And of course, it is complete nonsense. And because
I remember her original testimony with the fervor and the emotion. We have a potential traitor in the new administration. He could be blackmailed. Remember her. It was kabuki theater. It was all kabuki theater.
It was a completely idiotic assertion. I mean, since the Russians knew that this conversation was being listened to by the intelligence services. The Russians knew that Michael Flynn knew that they were listening in. What kind of blackmail power did the Russians have? And why would they even want to blackmail somebody who was well disposed towards them? It was the argument was so cretinous. This is the acting Attorney General of the United States. I mean, that really does say something shocking about the state of America.
I'll put the last word into this. My sneak preview is that Comey is going to be made to take the fall for all of this. And when we hear that, we're going to reassemble here. Okay, I want to thank both my guests for joining us here on the Gaggle. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.